The hot, merciless sun beat down on the dusty streets of Denver, Colorado. In the summer of 1876, when Josephine Valenti discovered just how little her own flesh and blood valued her life. Standing in the cramped back room of the Silver Dollar Saloon, her brother's whispered words still ringing in her ears like a death knell, Josie felt the ground beneath her feet crumble away as surely as the banks of the South Platte during the spring floods. "You can't mean it, Timothy," Josie whispered, her throat constricting as she stared at her brother's haggard face, once handsome features now ravaged by whiskey and desperation. "Tell me you haven't done this terrible thing." Timothy Valenti couldn't meet his sister's gaze, his fingers nervously working the brim of his worn hat. At 27, 4 years Josie's senior, he had once been her protector after their parents died of fever 5 years ago. Now he stood before her a shell of that man, gambling debts and whiskey having hollowed him out like rot in timber. "It's done, Josie," he muttered. "I owed Brock Harrington more than I could ever hope to pay. He was going to kill me. Said he'd take you instead. Just for a while, mind you. Just until I can win enough to buy you back." Josie's hands trembled as she clutched at the simple calico dress she'd sewn herself. At 23, she had managed the household, taken in laundry, and even helped at the general store to keep them afloat while Timothy squandered whatever he earned at the livery. "Buy me back." The words tasted like poison on her tongue. "I'm not cattle to be traded, Timothy. I'm your sister." I know," he groaned, running a hand through his unwashed hair. "But Harrington's not so bad. Owns that big ranch outside town. You'll have food, shelter." "As what? His slave? His whore?" Josie's voice rose dangerously and Timothy flinched. "Just a housekeeper," he said. "Just for a time." The lie hung between them like smoke. Everyone in Denver knew Brock Harrington's reputation. The rancher had buried 3 wives already, each one younger than the last. Rumors swirled about what happened behind the walls of his sprawling ranch house. "When?" Josie asked, her voice hardening as she fought back tears. She wouldn't give Timothy the satisfaction of seeing her break. "His men are coming tonight, after sunset." Timothy finally looked up, his eyes bloodshot. "I'm sorry, Josie, I truly am." Josie stepped back, putting distance between herself and this stranger wearing her brother's face. "Get out. Get out now. Josie, please get out," she screamed, grabbing the nearest object, a ceramic pitcher, and hurling it at the wall beside him. It shattered spectacularly, water spraying across the floorboards. Timothy fled, the door banging shut behind him. Alone in the small room they'd rented above the laundry where she worked, Josie fell to her knees, her mind racing. Run, that was her first thought. But where? She had no family left, no friends close enough to hide her from a man as powerful as Harrington. Denver had been her home since she was a child, but now its familiar streets seemed as threatening as any wilderness. With shaking hands, she pulled her small carpet bag from beneath the bed and began stuffing it with necessities: a change of clothes, her mother's hairbrush, the small amount of money she'd hidden in the lining of her winter coat. Not enough to get her far, but perhaps to the next town. Perhaps to safety. As the shadows lengthened across the worn floorboards, Josie heard heavy footsteps on the stairs outside. Her time had run out. The door burst open without a knock. 2 men filled the doorway, rough-looking cowhands with hard eyes and harder expressions. Behind them loomed Brock Harrington himself, a bear of a man in his 50s with a silver-streaked beard and cold, calculating eyes that raked over Josie's form with undisguised interest. "Well now," Harrington drawled, removing his hat with mock courtesy. "Ain't you a pretty little thing?" "Your brother didn't mention just how pretty." Josie backed away until her legs hit the edge of the bed. "Mr. Harrington, there's been a mistake. I'm not going anywhere with you." Harrington's smile never reached his eyes. "No mistake, Miss Valenti. Your brother owes me $800. He offered you as payment. I accepted." He gestured to his men. "Grab her things. We're leaving." "I'll scream," Josie warned, edging toward the window. "I'll bring the whole town running. Go ahead," Harrington shrugged. "I'll simply tell them you're a thief, that you and your brother tried to swindle me. Who do you think they'll believe? The most successful rancher in the territory, or a laundry girl and her drunk of a brother?" The truth of his words struck Josie like a physical blow. In this town, Harrington's word was law. His money bought influence with the sheriff, the mayor, even the territorial judge who passed through twice a year. As one of the men grabbed her bag and the other advanced toward her, Josie made a desperate decision. She lunged for the window, throwing it open and preparing to climb out onto the narrow ledge outside. Better to risk a fall than face whatever Harrington had planned, but she wasn't fast enough. Rough hands seized her arms, yanking her backward. A cloth pressed against her face, reeking of chemicals that made her head swim almost instantly. Now," Harrington's voice seemed to come from far away as darkness crowded the edges of Josie's vision. "No need for all this fuss. You'll learn to appreciate your new situation, girl. They all do, eventually." Her last thought before unconsciousness claimed her was a prayer not for rescue, for she believed in no fairy tales of knights or heroes, but for strength to endure whatever lay ahead. Miles away from Denver, Flynn Zachary wiped dust and sweat from his brow as he guided his horse down the trail toward town. At 32, Flynn had spent most of his adult life as a cowhand, but the last few years had seen him rise to foreman at the Circle D Ranch, one of the few operations that could compete with Harrington's sprawling enterprise. A decade of honest work, careful saving, and smart investments in cattle had even allowed him to purchase a small spread of his own, though he continued working for Douglas Denton, the Circle D owner and the closest thing to a father Flynn had known since losing his parents to cholera as a boy. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows as Flynn approached Denver, his saddlebags heavy with the month's payroll for the ranch hands. Denton trusted him with such tasks, knowing Flynn's reputation for honesty was as solid as his skill with horses and cattle. Flynn wasn't an imposing man at first glance, of medium height and lean build, but those who mistook his quiet demeanor for weakness quickly learned their error. The small scar that bisected his left eyebrow, and the confident way he carried himself, spoke of a man who had faced his share of troubles and emerged victorious. As he approached the outskirts of Denver, Flynn noticed a cloud of dust rising from the road ahead, riders moving fast, heading away from town. Something about their urgency put him on alert. He guided his buckskin gelding, Copper, off the main trail, using a stand of cottonwoods for cover as the riders approached, 3 men and a woman. Flynn's eyes narrowed as he made out Brock Harrington's massive form at the head of the group. One of the men held someone before him on his saddle. A woman, slumped forward, apparently unconscious. Flynn felt a chill that had nothing to do with the evening breeze. Harrington's reputation was well known among the ranching community. 3 wives dead under questionable circumstances. Numerous young women brought to his ranch, never to be seen in town again. Whispers of cruelty and depravity that even the hardened cowboys only discussed in hushed tones. Flynn had no love for Harrington. The older rancher had tried to force Denton out of business multiple times, using tactics that ranged from shady to outright illegal. They'd even come to blows once, 2 years back, when Flynn caught Harrington's men attempting to divert water from Circle D land during a drought. That confrontation had left Harrington with a broken nose and a grudge that time hadn't softened. As the riders passed his hiding place, the unconscious woman's face came into view, and Flynn felt a jolt of recognition. Josephine Valenti, the laundress who sometimes came to the Circle D to collect linens. A hard-working, gentle-spoken woman with intelligent eyes and a quiet dignity that had caught Flynn's attention more than once during her visits. He'd even found excuses to be around when she came, offering to help load her wagon, exchanging brief but pleasant conversations that had left him thinking about her long after she'd gone. Now she hung limp as a rag doll in the arms of Harrington's thug, her face pale in the fading light. Without conscious thought, Flynn's hand moved to the revolver at his hip. 4 against 1 weren't odds any sane man would take, especially with an innocent potentially caught in the crossfire. No, this required strategy, not brute force. Flynn waited until the riders were out of sight before spurring Copperback toward Denver. He needed information before he could act. The Silver Dollar Saloon buzzed with the usual evening crowd when Flynn pushed through the swinging doors. His eyes scanned the room quickly, landing on the hunched figure of Timothy Valenti at a corner table, a bottle of whiskey his only companion. Flynn had never thought much of Josie's brother, a man prone to big talk and bigger losses at the card table, but he'd tolerated him for her sake the few times their paths had crossed. Now, watching the man drink himself into oblivion while his sister was carried off by Harrington, Flynn felt a cold rage building in his chest. He crossed the room in long strides, grabbed Timothy by his shirt collar and hauled him to his feet. "Outside," Flynn growled, low enough that only Timothy could hear. Now, too drunk to resist effectively, Timothy stumbled alongside Flynn as he dragged him through the back door into the alley behind the saloon. "What the hell, Zachary?" Timothy slurred once Flynn released him, sending him staggering against the alley wall. Flynn's fist connected with the wall beside Timothy's head hard enough to split his knuckles, making the smaller man flinch violently. "Your sister," Flynn said, his voice deadly quiet. "What have you done?" Timothy's bloodshot eyes widened, then darted away guiltily. "Don't know what you're talking about." Flynn grabbed him by the throat this time, applying just enough pressure to make breathing difficult but not impossible. "I saw her, Valenti. Unconscious, being carried off by Harrington and his men. You've got 10 seconds to tell me exactly what happened before I decide the world's better off without you in it." The threat, delivered with such cold certainty, seemed to penetrate Timothy's alcohol-fogged mind. He swallowed hard against Flynn's grip. "I owed money," he croaked. "Gambling debt to Harrington. $800. I couldn't pay. He said he'd kill me, but then he offered another way. Said he'd take Josie instead, clear my debt." Flynn released Timothy with a disgusted shove that sent the man sprawling to the dirt. "You sold your sister. Your own flesh and blood." "It's not like that," Timothy protested, scrambling backward. "He said she'd just be a housekeeper, just until I could win enough to buy her back." Flynn laughed, a harsh sound devoid of humor. "And you believed him? Everyone knows what happens to women at Harrington's place." Timothy's face crumpled. "What was I supposed to do? He was going to kill me." "You were supposed to be a man," Flynn spat. "You were supposed to protect your sister, not trade her like cattle." He took a menacing step forward. "How long ago did they take her? Couple hours, maybe? I don't know. They were heading back to his ranch." Flynn knew Harrington's property, well 30 miles outside Denver, a sprawling ranch with a main house built like a fortress. The man employed at least 20 hands, most of them as morally bankrupt as their employer. Getting Josie out wouldn't be simple. "If anything happens to her," Flynn said quietly, "I'm coming back for you. Understand?" Timothy nodded frantically, still cowering against the alley wall. Flynn turned to leave, then paused. One more thing. Does Josie have any friends in town? Anyone who might take her in once I get her away from Harrington. Timothy shook his head. No one who'd stand against him. He owns half the town. Flynn nodded grimly. He'd suspected as much. Then I'll have to take her somewhere else. Somewhere he can't reach her. He left Timothy in the alley and headed toward the general store, mind racing. He'd need supplies, ammunition, and a plan. Most of all, he needed time, which was the one thing Josie might not have. The store owner raised his eyebrows at Flynn's urgent purchases, extra ammunition for his Winchester rifle and Colt revolver, bandages, laudanum, preserved food, canteens, and blankets. Heading out on a long hunt, Zachary? The shopkeeper asked as he tallied the items. Something like that, Flynn replied tersely, paying from the roll of bills meant for the ranch hand's wages. Denton would understand once Flynn explained, but for now, speed was essential. By the time Flynn rode out of Denver, night had fallen completely. A three-quarter moon provided enough light to follow the trail toward Harrington's ranch. Flynn knew he was potentially riding to his death one man against Harrington's small army, but the image of Josie's unconscious form wouldn't leave his mind. Whatever it took, he would not leave her to Harrington's mercy. Consciousness returned to Josie in painful increments. First came awareness of motion, the steady rhythm of a horse beneath her, and a hard arm around her waist. Then pain. Her head throbbed viciously. Her mouth felt stuffed with cotton, and her wrists burned where rough rope bound them together. Finally, memory flooded back: Timothy's betrayal, Harrington's cold eyes, the desperate leap for freedom that had failed. She kept her eyes closed, fighting the urge to struggle or cry out. Better to feign unconsciousness while she assessed her situation. The chemical-soaked cloth had worn off faster than her captors anticipated, giving her this small advantage. From the conversations around her, she gathered they were still several miles from Harrington's ranch. The man holding her complained about her weight, earning a sharp rebuke from Harrington. "Damage the merchandise and you'll answer to me," the rancher growled. "She's worth more than the $800 her brother owed." Merchandise. The word sent a chill through Josie's body that had nothing to do with the night air. In Harrington's eyes, she was nothing more than property now, a debt paid. As they rode, Josie's mind raced through possible escape scenarios, each more desperate than the last. Once they reached the ranch, surrounded by Harrington's men, her chances would dwindle to nearly nothing. She had to act before then, even with the odds stacked impossibly against her. The opportunity came when they stopped to water the horses at a small creek. The man holding Josie dismounted, dragging her roughly from the saddle. Her legs buckled deliberately as she finally opened her eyes, gasping as though just regaining consciousness. "She's awake, boss," the man called, maintaining his bruising grip on her arm. Harrington approached, holding out a canteen. "Drink," he ordered. "Don't want you passing out again before we get home." Josie took the canteen with bound hands, deliberately fumbling it so water spilled down her front. "Please," she whispered, making her voice weak and frightened, which wasn't difficult under the circumstances. "Please let me go. I'll work off Timothy's debt in town. I'll do anything." Harrington's laugh was cold. "You'll do anything anyway, girl. Might as well do it in comfort at my ranch. You'll have your own room, decent food. Better than that hovel you shared with your worthless brother." "I don't want comfort," Josie said, allowing real emotion to creep into her voice. "I want my freedom." "Freedom's an illusion, Miss Valenti," Harrington said, his tone almost philosophical. "We're all owned by someone or something. Money, duty, desire. At least with me, you'll know exactly where you stand." As he turned away to confer with one of his men, Josie took stock of her surroundings. 4 men, including Harrington. 4 horses. The creek behind them, dense woods beyond. If she could reach those trees. Josie stumbled as if still dizzy, sagging against her captor. "I think I'm going to be sick," she moaned. The man cursed, loosening his grip slightly as he tried to turn her away from him. It was all the opening Josie needed. She drove her elbow hard into his solar plexus, just as she'd seen men do during saloon brawls. As he doubled over, she wrenched free and ran not toward the road where they could easily overtake her on horseback, but toward the creek and the dark line of trees beyond. She heard shouts and curses behind her, the splash of water as she crossed the shallow creek. The trees loomed ahead, promising at least temporary shelter. 20 yards. 10. 5. The impact came from behind a flying tackle that sent her sprawling face first into the dirt at the forest's edge. One of the younger hands had caught her, his weight pinning her to the ground as she fought and clawed. "Got her, boss," he called, grunting as Josie's elbow connected with his ribs. Heavy footsteps approached, and then Harrington's voice, cold with fury. "I was going to be gentle with you, girl. Was going to give you time to adjust, but it seems you need to learn your place right away." Josie felt herself hauled upright, her arms wrenched painfully behind her back as Harrington approached. The back of his hand connected with her cheek in a blow that sent stars shooting across her vision and the taste of blood filling her mouth. "That's a small sample," Harrington said as Josie swayed on her feet. "Cross me again, and you'll wish your brother had let me kill him instead." As they dragged her back toward the horses, a new sound cut through the night, hoofbeats approaching fast from the direction of Denver. Harrington and his men turned, hands moving to their weapons. A single rider emerged from the darkness, the moonlight gleaming off his light hair as he reined his horse to a stop several yards away. Josie's heart leaped with unexpected recognition. Flynn Zachary from the Circle D. She'd spoken with him many times during her laundry visits to the ranch, had even daydreamed about his kind eyes and the quiet confidence he exuded. What was he doing here? "Evening, gentlemen," Flynn called, his casual tone belied by the tension in his posture and the rifle resting across his saddle. "Seems like the lady doesn't want to go with you, Harrington." Harrington's laugh was incredulous. "Zachary, what the hell business is this of yours? Turn around and ride away while you still can." Flynn's gaze shifted to Josie, taking in her bound hands, the blood at the corner of her mouth, the fear and hope warring in her eyes. "I'm making it my business," he said simply. "Miss Valenti isn't going anywhere with you." "The woman's mine, fair and square," Harrington growled. "Her brother owed me money. She's the payment." "People aren't property," Flynn said, his voice hardening. "Whatever deal you made with that worthless drunk doesn't involve her. Now let her go and we can all ride away from this." Harrington's laugh was ugly. "4 guns against 1. Those odds favor me, boy." "Maybe," Flynn acknowledged. "But I promise the first bullet goes through your head, Harrington. Are your men loyal enough to die for you after you're gone?" The standoff stretched taut as a wire. Josie barely breathed, aware that her life hung in the balance of this moment. "You always were a fool, Zachary," Harrington finally said. "Denton's trained dog growling at things above your station." He nodded to his men. "Kill him." Everything happened at once. The man holding Josie shoved her aside to draw his gun. Flynn's rifle cracked, and Harrington howled as the bullet caught him in the shoulder rather than the head he'd been promised. The night erupted in gunfire as Flynn threw himself from his horse, using the animal for cover as he returned fire. Josie scrambled toward the trees again, desperate to escape the bullets flying around her. A stray shot kicked up dirt near her feet, making her change direction. In the confusion, she collided with one of Harrington's men who had been circling to get a better angle on Flynn. The impact sent them both sprawling. Josie's bound hands made regaining her feet difficult, but terror lent her strength as the man lunged for her. She kicked out desperately, her boot connecting with his face. He fell back with a curse, giving her precious seconds to scramble away. More gunfire. A man screamed. Josie couldn't tell who had been hit in the darkness and chaos. She worked frantically at the ropes binding her wrists, using her teeth to loosen the knots as she crouched behind a fallen log. The firing stopped abruptly. In the sudden silence, Josie heard heavy breathing, the nervous whicker of horses, and then Flynn's voice calling her name. "Miss Valenti." "Josie, are you hurt?" She hesitated, afraid of a trick, but when he called again, the genuine concern in his voice convinced her. "Here," she called back, her voice shaky. Behind the log, footsteps approached cautiously. Flynn appeared, silhouetted against the night sky, his rifle still at the ready. When he saw her, relief washed over his features. "Thank God," he breathed, kneeling beside her to examine her bonds. His hands were gentle as he finished the job she'd started, unwinding the rope from her raw wrists. "I wasn't sure if you'd been hit in the crossfire." "What happened?" Josie asked, looking fearfully toward where Harrington and his men had been. "Are they?" "Two of his men are dead," Flynn said grimly. "Harrington and the other one are wounded but alive. They've retreated, but they won't go far. We need to move quickly." As if to emphasize his point, a shot rang out from the darkness, the bullet splintering bark from a tree near their heads. Flynn pulled Josie down, covering her body with his own as more shots followed. "My horse is just beyond those trees," Flynn whispered. "When I start firing, run for him. His name is Copper. He'll let you mount." "What about you?" Josie asked, suddenly terrified at the thought of leaving him behind. "I'll be right behind you," he promised, though something in his eyes made her doubt. "Ready. Go." Flynn rose to one knee and began firing methodically toward the muzzle flashes in the darkness. Josie ran as he'd instructed, heart pounding in her chest. She found the buckskin gelding waiting nervously where Flynn had left him. The horse shied slightly at her approach but calmed when she spoke his name softly. Using a fallen log as a mounting block, Josie managed to pull herself into the saddle despite her skirts. She turned the horse back toward where she'd left Flynn, unwilling to abandon her rescuer. More gunfire erupted, followed by a pained yell that made Josie's blood run cold. She urged the horse forward just as Flynn emerged from the trees, running with a slight limp. Behind him, she could make out shadowy figures in pursuit. "Go," Flynn shouted, waving her away. "Ride north, I'll catch up." Instead, Josie guided the horse toward him, extending her hand as he had once done for her when helping her down from her laundry wagon. Their eyes met for a heartbeat, hers determined, his surprised but grateful. Then his hand clasped hers, and with a strength that belied her slender frame, Josie helped him swing up behind her. "Hang on," Flynn called, taking the reins from her hands as bullets whizzed past. He kicked the horse into a gallop, heading not north as he'd instructed her but east, away from both Denver and Harrington's ranch. Josie clung to the saddle horn as they rode hard through the night, the sound of pursuit fading behind them. Flynn's arm around her waist was solid and reassuring, his chest warm against her back. Despite the danger, despite the terror of the past hours, Josie found herself drawing comfort from his nearness. They rode for what felt like hours, Copper maintaining a punishing pace until they reached a small stream where Flynn finally allowed the horse to slow. "Are you hit?" Josie asked, twisting in the saddle to look at him, remembering the pained sound she'd heard. "Just grazed," Flynn said, though the tightness around his eyes belied the casualness of his tone. Caught the edge of my leg, nothing serious. We should stop and tend to it, Josie insisted. Flynn shook his head. Not yet. We need more distance. Harrington won't give up easily. You're worth too much to his pride. The reminder of her situation sent a chill through Josie. Where are we going? There's an old line cabin about 10 miles from here, used by the Circle D hands during roundup. It's isolated, hard to find if you don't know where to look. We can hole up there until I figure out our next move. Our next move. The words warmed Josie unexpectedly. In the chaos, she hadn't had time to wonder why Flynn Zachary, a man she barely knew beyond brief, friendly exchanges, would risk his life to rescue her from Harrington. Now the question pressed urgently. Why did you come for me? She asked quietly as they picked their way along the stream to mask their trail. You could have been killed. Flynn was silent for so long that Josie thought he might not answer. When he did, his voice was low near her ear. I saw them taking you, he said. Saw you unconscious. Found your brother in the saloon afterward and got the truth out of him. His arm tightened slightly around her waist. I couldn't let Harrington take you, not knowing what he does to women at his ranch. But why risk yourself? We're hardly more than acquaintances. Again that pause, as if Flynn was carefully choosing his words. I've noticed you, he finally said. Every time you came to the Circle D, the way you work without complaint, the kindness you show even to the roughest hands, your smile. He cleared his throat. A man notices such things. Heat that had nothing to do with the night's exertions rose in Josie's cheeks. She'd noticed him too, his quiet competence, the respect he commanded without raising his voice, the gentle way he handled horses and the younger ranch hands alike. Thank you, she said softly, for coming after me, for risking everything. Don't thank me yet, Flynn replied, a hint of grimness returning to his voice. We're not safe until we're well away from Harrington's reach, and that won't be easy. They lapsed into silence after that, both aware of the precarious position they now occupied. Harrington was not a man to forget a slight, and Flynn had done far more than slight him. He'd wounded him, killed 2 of his men, and stolen what the rancher considered his rightful property. There would be a reckoning, sooner or later. For now, though, they had gained a temporary reprieve. As they continued through the night, Josie found herself leaning back against Flynn's solid warmth, drawing strength from his presence. Whatever came next, at least she wasn't facing it alone. The line cabin appeared just before dawn, a small, sturdy structure nestled at the base of a rocky outcropping that provided natural protection on 3 sides. Flynn circled the area carefully before approaching, alert for any sign they'd been followed. Wait here, he told Josie, helping her down from the saddle. Let me check inside first. The cabin had clearly been empty for some time, but it was in good repair. Tight roof, solid walls, a small stone fireplace, and a single room with a narrow bed, a rough-hewn table, and 2 chairs. Shelves held basic supplies: coffee, beans, flour, and other staples in tins to protect them from rodents. Flynn found a lantern and lit it, illuminating the simple space before calling Josie inside. It's not much, he said apologetically, but it's secure. There's food, water from the spring out back. We can rest here. Josie entered cautiously, taking in the humble surroundings with grateful eyes. After the night's terrors, even this basic shelter seemed luxurious. It's perfect, she said sincerely. Thank you. Flynn nodded, suddenly awkward now that they were alone in the small space. You should rest, he said. Take the bed, I'll keep watch. Josie frowned, noticing the way he favored his injured leg. Not until I've seen to that wound. Flynn started to protest, but Josie had already spotted a shelf with basic medical supplies: antiseptic, bandages, a needle and thread for more serious injuries. She pointed to a chair. Sit, she ordered, her tone leaving no room for argument. "I've dealt with worse than a bullet graze, Mr. Zachary." To her surprise, Flynn complied, lowering himself gingerly into the chair. "Flynn," he said as she gathered the supplies, "if we're going to be fugitives together, you might as well use my given name." Josie smiled slightly as she knelt beside him. "Flynn, then, and I'm Josie." The bullet had indeed only grazed his thigh, but the wound was deep enough to have soaked his pant leg with blood. Josie cut away the fabric with a knife from the shelf, cleaning the injury as gently as possible. Flynn remained stoic, barely flinching despite what must have been considerable pain. "You're lucky," Josie commented as she worked. "Another inch and this would have hit the artery." "I've had worse," Flynn replied, though his knuckles were white where he gripped the edge of the chair. As Josie bandaged his leg, she became acutely aware of their proximity, her hands on his bare thigh, his face close enough that she could feel his breath on her hair. A strange tension filled the small cabin, having nothing to do with their dangerous situation and everything to do with the man before her. "There," she said finally, securing the last of the bandage. "It should heal clean if we keep it covered." "Thank you," Flynn said, his voice rougher than before. He stood carefully, testing his weight on the injured leg. "You should try to sleep now. I'll take first watch." "You need rest too," Josie argued. "You've been shot, for heaven's sake." "I'll be fine for a few hours," Flynn insisted. "Please, Josie. It would ease my mind to know you're getting some rest." Too exhausted to argue further, Josie finally agreed, removing her boots before lying down on the narrow bed. She expected sleep to elude her after everything that had happened, but physical and emotional exhaustion quickly pulled her under. When she woke, golden afternoon light streamed through the cabin's single window. Flynn sat at the table, cleaning his revolver, his rifle leaning against the wall within easy reach. He looked up when she stirred, a smile softening his weather-lined face. "You slept straight through the morning," he said. "Must have needed it." Josie sat up, embarrassed to have slept so long while he kept watch. "You should have woken me. You need sleep too." "I dozed a bit," he admitted, "and I made some coffee. It's not fancy, but it's hot." The simple domesticity of sharing coffee in the cabin gave Josie a strange sense of displacement. Just yesterday, she'd been doing laundry in Denver, worrying about paying the rent, completely unaware that by nightfall her brother would sell her like cattle and her life would irrevocably change. "What happens now?" she asked, cradling the tin mug between her hands. Flynn's expression grew serious. "Harrington will have men searching for us. He can't let this go. His reputation would suffer if word got out that a single cowboy stole what was his." "I was never his," Josie said fiercely. "No matter what deal he made with Timothy." "I know that," Flynn said gently. "But Harrington doesn't see it that way, and he has enough influence that the law might side with him if he claims your stolen property." The bitter truth of his words sank in. Even if they made it back to Denver, Josie would never be safe as long as Harrington lived. "So we run," she said, straightening her shoulders. "Where?" Flynn studied her face, seeming to measure her resolve. "I have some money saved, enough to get us to California, maybe. Or north to Wyoming territory, somewhere Harrington's reach doesn't extend." "Us," Josie repeated, focusing on the word that mattered most in his statement. "You'd leave everything behind, your job, your home, to help me escape." Flynn's gaze didn't waver. "I already made that choice when I went after you last night, Josie." "But why?" she pressed. "No one does something like this for a near stranger, not without a reason." Flynn set down his coffee mug, his expression difficult to read in the dappled afternoon light. "Maybe I'm tired of watching men like Harrington take whatever they want without consequences. Maybe I've wanted a fresh start somewhere new for a long time. Or maybe—" He hesitated, and Josie found herself holding her breath, waiting for him to continue. "Maybe I've been watching you for months," he finally said, the words coming faster now. "Noticing how you hum while you work, how you always have a kind word for everyone at the ranch, even old Clancy who snaps at everyone. How you never complain about the load of laundry, even when it's twice what it should be. Maybe I've been trying to work up the courage to speak to you properly, to ask if I could call on you in town." Josie stared at him, warmth spreading through her chest at his admission. "I didn't know," she whispered. "How could you?" Flynn asked with a rueful smile. "I never said anything. Kept telling myself next time I'd find the words, and then I saw Harrington taking you and I realized all the things I should have said sooner." The intensity of his gaze made Josie's heart race. She'd noticed him too, of course had even daydreamed about him asking to call on her, but had never imagined he returned her interest. "So what do we do?" she asked softly. "Where do we go from here?" "First, we stay put for another day or two," Flynn said, returning to practicalities. "Let the initial search die down. Then we head north, cross into Wyoming. I know people there who can help us. From there, we can decide California, Oregon, wherever you want to go." "Wherever we want to go," Josie corrected gently. "If we're in this together." The smile that spread across Flynn's face made something flutter in Josie's stomach. "Together," he agreed. Their days in the line cabin fell into a careful rhythm. Flynn ventured out only to hunt for fresh meat and to check for signs of pursuit. Josie kept the small space immaculate, cooked with the limited supplies available, and redressed Flynn's wound daily. The close quarters forced an intimacy that might have been uncomfortable under different circumstances, but instead fostered a deepening bond between them. They talked for hours, Flynn telling stories of his years as a cowhand, Josie sharing memories of her parents and her life before Timothy's gambling consumed everything. They discovered shared values, similar dreams of a small ranch of their own someday, a quiet life built on honest work. On their third evening in the cabin, as they sat before the small fire sharing the rabbit Flynn had snared, Josie finally asked the question that had been weighing on her mind. "What about the Circle D? Won't Mr. Denton worry when you don't return?" Flynn nodded slowly. "I left with the payroll," he admitted. "Douglas will think I've stolen it at first, but once he learns about Harrington and what happened, he'll understand. He's a good man. I've left a letter with a friend in Denver explaining everything, to be delivered if I don't return within a week." "The money you mentioned for California, is that the payroll?" Josie asked, concerned. Flynn looked shocked at the suggestion. "No, God, no, that's my own savings. I'd never steal from Douglas. The payroll's in my saddlebag, separate from my money. When we leave here, we'll find a way to get it back to him." Relief washed over Josie. She'd begun to care deeply for Flynn over these past days, and the thought that he might be dishonest had troubled her. "We should leave tomorrow," Flynn said, changing the subject. "I haven't seen any sign of Harrington's men for 2 days. The initial search has probably moved further south." Josie nodded, though the prospect of leaving their safe haven filled her with trepidation. "How long to Wyoming?" 3, maybe 4 days if we're careful. "We'll avoid towns, stick to trails I know from cattle drives." Flynn hesitated, then reached across the table to take her hand. "Josie, I need to ask you something important." Her heart quickened at his serious tone. "Yes, when we reach Wyoming, I want to marry you." The words came out in a rush, surprising them both. Flynn looked momentarily flustered but pressed on. "Not just for propriety's sake, though there's that too, but because these days with you have shown me what I think I already knew, that you're the woman I want to build a life with." Josie's breath caught. She'd known their relationship was evolving into something deeper than friendship, had felt it in the lingering glances and the way her heart leaped whenever he returned from his scouting trips. But marriage, so soon. "You hardly know me," she said softly, though she didn't withdraw her hand from his. "I know enough," Flynn replied simply. "I know you're brave and kind. I know you're stronger than anyone gives you credit for. I know I want to wake up seeing your face every morning for the rest of my life." His thumb traced gentle circles on her palm. "But if you need more time, I understand. The offer stands regardless." Josie looked at their joined hands, then up at Flynn's earnest face. In many ways, he was still a stranger. 4 days of intense circumstances hardly constituted a proper courtship. Yet she couldn't deny the connection that had formed between them, stronger and more genuine than anything she'd experienced before. "Yes," she said finally, surprising herself with the certainty she felt. "When we reach Wyoming, I'll marry you." The joy that transformed Flynn's face made any doubts she might have harbored melt away. He raised her hand to his lips, pressing a tender kiss to her knuckles. "I'll spend every day making sure you don't regret that decision," he promised. That night, as they prepared for sleep, Flynn on his bedroll near the door, Josie on the cabin's narrow bed, the atmosphere between them had changed, charged with the knowledge of their commitment to each other. Tomorrow they would leave the relative safety of the cabin and face whatever dangers lay between them and their future together. For tonight, though, they had this small shelter and the promise of tomorrow. Dawn broke clear and cool as they prepared to depart. Flynn had risen early to saddle Copper and pack their meager supplies. Josie had cleaned the cabin thoroughly, leaving it ready for the next Circle D cowboy who might need its shelter. "Ready?" Flynn asked as Josie emerged from the cabin, wearing her now clean but wrinkled dress. He handed her a worn leather jacket. "Take this. The mornings are cold where we're headed." The jacket engulfed her slender frame, but Josie welcomed its warmth and the faint scent of Flynn that clung to the leather. As he helped her mount, his hands lingering at her waist longer than strictly necessary, she felt a flutter of anticipation for their future, despite the dangers that still lay ahead. They rode north, keeping to sheltered valleys and wooded trails when possible. Flynn was constantly vigilant, his eyes scanning the horizon for signs of pursuit, his hand never far from his revolver. They spoke little during the day, saving conversation for their evening camps when they could be certain they weren't being overheard. On the second night, as they made camp in a secluded grove of pines, Flynn finally voiced the concern that had been growing since they left the cabin. "I think we're being followed," he said quietly as they shared a simple meal of jerky and hardtack. "Not close, but steady. I've spotted the same tracks for the past 2 days." Josie felt her stomach clench with fear. "Harrington's men, could be." Flynn's expression was grim in the firelight. "Tomorrow we'll try to lose them in the high country. There's a pass I know that's treacherous but passable this time of year. Few would risk it. And if that doesn't work," Flynn's hand found hers in the darkness, "then I'll deal with them. I won't let anyone take you, Josie, not while I'm still breathing." The fierce protectiveness in his voice sent a shiver through her that had nothing to do with fear. Since leaving the cabin, they'd maintained a careful physical distance despite their engagement, both aware of the propriety they were already stretching thin. But tonight, with danger possibly closing in, Josie found herself unwilling to maintain that distance. She moved to sit beside him, leaning her head against his shoulder. After a moment's hesitation, his arm came around her, holding her close against the night's chill. "I keep thinking about what happens after Wyoming," she said softly. "About our life together." Flynn's voice was a rumble she could feel through his chest. "What do you see?" "A small ranch," Josie mused, allowing herself to imagine it. "Nothing grand like Harrington's, but enough land for a decent herd. A garden where I can grow vegetables, maybe a few fruit trees, children eventually. Flynn's arm tightened around her at the mention of children. How many? He asked, and she could hear the smile in his voice. 2 at least, maybe more. Josie turned her face up to his, barely visible in the dying firelight. What about you? What do you see? Everything you just described, Flynn answered honestly. A place that's ours, work that means something, watching our children grow up safe and loved. He hesitated, then added softly, and you, always you. The simple sincerity of his words moved Josie deeply. She reached up to touch his face, tracing the line of his jaw with gentle fingers. Flynn caught her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm that sent warmth spiraling through her. For a breathless moment, they remained frozen, gazes locked in the darkness. Then Flynn lowered his head, slowly enough that she could have pulled away if she wished. Instead, Josie rose to meet him, their lips connecting in a first kiss that was tentative yet filled with promise. When they separated, both slightly breathless, Flynn rested his forehead against hers. "We should rest," he murmured, though he made no move to release her. "Tomorrow will be difficult terrain." Reluctantly, they parted, retreating to their separate bedrolls on opposite sides of the small fire. But something had changed between them, a threshold crossed that could not be uncrossed. As Josie drifted toward sleep, she found herself not dreading the dangers ahead, but looking forward to the life that waited beyond them, a life with Flynn. Morning brought heavy cloud cover and a biting wind that promised rain before nightfall. They broke camp quickly, Flynn's concern about their pursuers lending urgency to their movements. By mid-morning, they had reached the base of the mountain range that separated them from Wyoming territory. There, Flynn pointed to a narrow trail winding up between 2 craggy peaks. "That's our path. It gets rough higher up, but Copper can handle it." Josie eyed the steep trail with trepidation. "And Harrington's men. Most would consider it too dangerous," Flynn said, "but if they're determined enough." He let the sentence hang, both of them understanding the implication. The ascent was grueling. The trail narrowed in places to barely the width of their horse, with sheer drops on one side that made Josie dizzy if she looked down. Rain began as they neared the summit, a cold drizzle that quickly turned to sleet as the temperature dropped. Flynn guided Copper with expert hands, murmuring encouragement to the horse when the footing grew treacherous. Josie clung to Flynn, her face pressed against his back for protection from the icy precipitation, trusting him completely to navigate them safely through the pass. Near the highest point, as they rounded a sharp bend in the trail, disaster struck. A section of path, weakened by the rain, gave way beneath Copper's hooves. The horse neighed in terror as his hind legs slipped toward the edge. Flynn reacted instantly, throwing his weight forward and urging Copper to lunge ahead. The gelding responded with a desperate surge of strength, scrambling onto solid ground but not before throwing his riders. Josie felt herself falling, heard Flynn's shout of alarm, then experienced a jarring impact as she landed on a narrow ledge several feet below the trail. Pain shot through her ankle and she cried out, scrambling for purchase on the slick rock. "Josie." Flynn's voice came from above, tight with fear. "Don't move, I'm coming for you." She looked up to see him maneuvering carefully down toward her, using small outcroppings as handholds. His face was white with tension, but his movements were sure and deliberate. "Are you hurt?" he called. "My ankle," Josie replied, trying to keep her voice steady despite the terror clawing at her throat. "I think it's just twisted, not broken." The ledge she'd landed on was barely wide enough for her to sit, with a dizzying drop beyond. One wrong move, and she would fall hundreds of feet to the jagged rocks below. Josie pressed herself against the cliff face, trying not to think about the abyss at her back. Flynn reached her after what seemed an eternity, positioning himself carefully on the narrow ledge beside her. His arm came around her immediately, anchoring her against him and the solid rock. "I've got you," he said, his breath warm against her cold cheek. "We'll get out of this. Can you climb if I help you?" Josie tested her injured ankle, wincing at the pain but finding it could bear some weight. "I think so." "Good. Copper's waiting above. I'll go first, help pull you up." "Ready." The climb was excruciating, each movement sending sharp pain through Josie's ankle. Flynn guided her hand to each hold, his voice a constant reassurance as they inched upward. When they finally reached the trail again, Josie collapsed against him, shaking from exertion and delayed shock. Flynn held her tightly, his own breathing ragged. "I thought I'd lost you," he murmured into her hair, "when I saw you fall." Josie clutched at his shirt, drawing comfort from his solid presence. "You didn't. I'm here. We're both here." After a moment, Flynn gently examined her ankle, which had already begun to swell. "We need to bind this," he said, using his neckerchief to create a makeshift compression bandage. "And we need shelter. The storm's getting worse." As if to emphasize his point, thunder rumbled overhead and the sleet intensified. Flynn helped Josie onto Copper's back before mounting behind her, keeping her injured leg carefully positioned. "There's an old trapper's cabin about 2 miles ahead," he told her as they proceeded at a cautious pace. "If it's still standing, we can wait out the storm there." The cabin, when they reached it, was little more than a crude shelter, a single room with a damaged roof and a stone fireplace that miraculously remained intact. But after their ordeal on the mountain, it seemed as welcoming as a palace. Flynn helped Josie inside and settled her on a rough bench before tending to Copper, making sure the faithful gelding had shelter under an adjacent lean-to. By the time he returned, carrying their saddlebags and his rifle, Josie had managed to start a small fire using the dry kindling stacked beside the hearth. "Your ankle needs better attention," Flynn said, kneeling before her to examine the injury more carefully in the firelight. "It's a bad sprain, but I don't think anything's broken." He worked methodically, removing her boot with gentle hands, cleaning the scrapes on her leg, and rebinding the ankle more securely with strips torn from a spare shirt. His touch was tender despite the roughness of his calloused fingers, and Josie found herself watching his face as he concentrated on his task, the furrow between his brows, the set of his jaw, the way his eyes reflected the dancing flames. "What?" Flynn asked, looking up to find her staring. "I was just thinking," Josie said softly, "about how lucky I am that you were the one who saw Harrington taking me, that you were the one who came after me." Flynn's hand stilled on her ankle. "I wasn't going to let him hurt you," he said simply. "Not when you what?" Josie prompted when he didn't continue. Flynn met her gaze directly, the firelight illuminating the emotion in his eyes. "Not when I was already half in love with you from watching you all those months." The admission hung in the air between them, more intimate somehow than their shared kiss the night before. Josie reached out to touch his face, her fingers tracing the line of his cheekbone, the slight stubble on his jaw. "And now," she whispered. "Now, I'm all the way in love with you," Flynn said, the words rough with emotion. "Have been since that first night at the cabin, when you insisted on tending my wound even after everything you'd been through. When I saw how strong you were, how kind despite every reason not to be." Josie felt tears sting her eyes, not from pain but from the overwhelming realization that this man, this good, brave man, loved her. After Timothy's betrayal, after being treated as property to be traded, Flynn's regard was a balm to her wounded spirit. "I love you too," she said, the words feeling both momentous and completely natural. I think I started falling for you the day you helped me load that impossibly heavy basket of linens into my wagon at the Circle D. You didn't have to, but you did. And you didn't make me feel weak for needing help." Flynn turned his face to press a kiss into her palm. "We should get some rest," he said, though his eyes told a different story. "We're still a day's ride from the Wyoming border, and your ankle needs time to heal." The storm raged outside, wind howling through the gaps in the cabin's walls, rain finding its way through the damaged roof in places. But huddled together before the fire, Josie felt safer than she had in years. Flynn's arm around her shoulders, his steady heartbeat under her cheek as she leaned against his chest, these were worth all the hardships they'd endured. They dozed fitfully as the storm continued through the night. Near dawn, Josie woke to find Flynn already alert, his body tense beside her. "What is it?" she asked, instantly awake. "Listen," he murmured. Through the diminishing rain, Josie heard what had alarmed him: hoofbeats, multiple horses approaching the cabin. Flynn was on his feet in an instant, moving to the small window to peer outside. "3 riders," he reported grimly. "Harrington's men from the look of them. They must have followed our trail despite the pass." Fear clutched at Josie's heart. "What do we do?" Flynn checked his revolver, then handed Josie his rifle. "You know how to use this," she nodded. Her father had taught her the basics of shooting when she was younger. "Good. If anything happens to me, don't hesitate. Get to Copper and ride north. Keep the morning sun on your right and you'll reach Wyoming by nightfall." "Nothing's going to happen to you," Josie said fiercely, clutching the rifle. "We're getting out of this together." Flynn's smile was tight but genuine. "That's the plan." He moved to position himself beside the door, revolver ready. "Let's see what they want first. Maybe they'll be reasonable." They both knew it was unlikely. Men who would follow them through a mountain pass in a thunderstorm weren't the type to give up easily. The riders stopped outside the cabin. A voice called out, "We know you're in there, Zachary. Come out with the woman and we'll let you live." Flynn snorted softly. "Generous of them," he muttered, then called back. "The woman isn't property to be returned. Go back to Harrington and tell him to cut his losses." "Can't do that," the voice replied. "Boss wants what's his, and he wants you dead for killing his men. You've got 1 minute to send her out or we're coming in shooting." Flynn turned to Josie, his expression grave. "Is your ankle strong enough to run if you have to?" She tested it gingerly. The pain was still considerable, but the tight binding helped. "If I have to," she confirmed. "There's a back way out of here, just a gap in the wall behind that shelf. If shooting starts, I want you to slip out that way, get to Copper and ride. Don't look back, don't hesitate." "I'm not leaving you," Josie protested. "Yes, you are," Flynn said firmly, "because I need to know you're safe. I can handle these 3, but not if I'm worried about you getting caught in the crossfire." Before Josie could argue further, the door splintered inward as one of Harrington's men kicked it open. Flynn fired immediately, catching the man in the shoulder and sending him staggering backward. "Go!" Flynn shouted to Josie, positioning himself to shield her as bullets began to fly. Heart in her throat, Josie moved toward the back of the cabin, keeping low. She could hear Flynn exchanging fire with the attackers, the confined space of the cabin echoing with gunshots. As she reached the gap in the wall, a cry of pain made her turn back. Flynn had been hit, blood spreading across his side as he fired again, dropping a second attacker. In that moment, Josie made her decision. She wouldn't leave him. Raising the rifle, she took careful aim at the third man, who was advancing on Flynn's position. She squeezed the trigger, the recoil nearly knocking her off her feet. Her shot went wide, but it distracted the man long enough for Flynn to regain his footing and fire again. This time his bullet found its mark, and the third attacker collapsed. The sudden silence was deafening after the gunfire. Flynn turned to Josie, his expression a mixture of exasperation and pride. "I told you to run," he said, pressing a hand to his bleeding side. "And I decided not to," Josie replied, lowering the rifle. "Are you badly hurt?" Flynn shook his head, moving toward her with a slight grimace. "Bullet grazed my ribs. Painful but not serious. You?" "I'm fine." Josie's hands were shaking with the aftermath of adrenaline as she set the rifle aside. "Are they?" "Two dead, one wounded badly," Flynn confirmed grimly. "Check the saddlebags on Copper. There should be more bandages." While Josie retrieved the medical supplies, Flynn checked on the fallen men, confirming that two were beyond help and securing the third, who was unconscious but still breathing. "What do we do with him?" Josie asked as she helped Flynn remove his shirt to treat his wound. "Leave him the canteen and some food," Flynn decided. "His horse is still outside. If he wakes, he can make his way back to civilization." The bullet had indeed only grazed Flynn's ribs, leaving a painful furrow but nothing life-threatening. Josie cleaned and bandaged it as best she could, her fingers gentle despite their trembling. "We need to move," Flynn said when she'd finished. "The storm's passed, and we're too close to the border to delay now. These three might have sent word back to Harrington about our location." They gathered their few possessions quickly, mounted Copper, and set out once more toward Wyoming. Flynn was quiet as they rode, his face drawn with pain from his wound, and perhaps from the men he'd been forced to kill. Josie respected his silence, understanding the weight that taking a life even in self-defense placed on a good man's conscience. By late afternoon, they crested a rise that gave them a view of rolling plains stretching northward. "Wyoming territory," Flynn announced, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. "We've made it." Josie felt a surge of emotion, relief, hope, and a strange sense of homecoming despite never having set foot in the territory before. "What now?" "There's a settlement called Laramie about 20 miles ahead," Flynn said. "I've got friends there from my cattle drive days. We'll find a preacher, make good on our engagement, then decide our next move." As they descended toward the plains, Josie felt the weight of the past week: Timothy's betrayal, Harrington's cruelty, their desperate flight begin to lift. Ahead lay uncertainty, yes, but also possibility. A new beginning, with the man whose arms encircled her as they rode toward their future together. Laramie welcomed them with the bustle of a growing frontier town, streets muddy from the recent rains, wooden buildings housing everything from a general store to a lively saloon, and the constant movement of people carving out lives in the newly organized territory. Flynn guided Copper directly to a modest building with a sign proclaiming it Carter's boarding house. A gray-haired woman emerged at their approach, her weathered face breaking into a smile of recognition when she saw Flynn. "Flynn Zachary, as I live and breathe," she exclaimed. "It's been, 3 years?" "About that, Mrs. Carter," Flynn replied, dismounting carefully to avoid aggravating his wound. "We need a room if you have one to spare." The woman's sharp eyes took in Flynn's bandaged torso visible beneath his partially buttoned shirt, Josie's bruised face and bandaged ankle, and their general state of exhaustion. "Trouble following you, I take it?" she asked, her voice lowered. "The kind that doesn't respect territorial lines," Flynn confirmed. "We need a safe place for a day or two, and a preacher, if the Reverend Abernathy is still in town." Mrs. Carter's eyebrows rose at the mention of a preacher, her gaze shifting to Josie with new interest. "He is indeed." "And who might this young lady be?" "Josephine Valenti," Josie introduced herself. "Flynn's fiancée." "Fiancée, is it?" Mrs. Carter's expression softened. "Well, any woman brave enough to take on this troublemaker is welcome in my house. Come in, both of you. You look dead on your feet." True to frontier hospitality, Mrs. Carter asked no questions as she settled them in a clean, comfortable room, brought hot water for washing, and promised a proper meal once they'd rested. Left alone for the first time in days, Flynn and Josie exchanged a look of cautious relief. Mrs. Carter is discreet, Flynn assured her, and she's no friend to men like Harrington. We're safe here. Josie sank onto the edge of the bed, the reality of their journey and their arrival finally hitting her full force. "We made it," she whispered. "I can hardly believe it." Flynn knelt before her despite his injury, taking her hands in his. "Believe it," he said softly. "Harrington can't reach us here, and as soon as you're ready, we'll make this arrangement permanent just as I promised." "Tomorrow," Josie decided, squeezing his hands. "I don't want to wait longer than that." The smile that transformed Flynn's tired face was worth every hardship they'd endured. "Tomorrow it is." They were married the following afternoon in Reverend Abernathy's small church, with Mrs. Carter and the Reverend's wife as witnesses. Josie wore a simple blue dress Mrs. Carter had helped her alter from one of her own, with wildflowers gathered by the boarding house made as her bouquet. Flynn had managed to procure a clean shirt and had even visited the barber for a shave and haircut, his face younger and more handsome than ever without the trail dust and stubble of their journey. The ceremony was brief but meaningful, their vows spoken with a depth of emotion that moved even the Reverend, who had performed countless frontier weddings. When Flynn slipped a simple gold band onto Josie's finger purchased that morning from the town's jeweler with some of his carefully saved money, and bent to seal their union with a kiss, Josie felt a completeness she had never known before. "Mrs. Zachary," Flynn murmured against her lips, the wonder in his voice matching the joy in her heart. Their wedding supper was a modest affair at the boarding house, but Mrs. Carter had outdone herself with fried chicken, fresh bread, and even an apple pie to mark the occasion. As they ate, Flynn broached the subject that would determine their future. "I've been thinking," he said, his hand finding Josie's under the table. "I still have enough saved to get us to California if that's what you want, but there's good land available here in Wyoming. The territory's growing fast, and Douglas taught me enough about ranching to make a go of it." "You want to stay?" Josie asked, searching his face. "Even knowing Harrington might eventually learn where we've settled." "Harrington's reach is limited," Flynn replied. "And I'm tired of running. Tired of working other men's land. I want to build something that's ours, a home, a ranch, a future for our family." He squeezed her hand. "But only if you feel safe here." Josie considered his words carefully. The terror of her abduction still lingered, but so did the memory of Flynn facing down Harrington and his men to rescue her. If he believed they could build a life here, she trusted his judgment. "I want that too," she decided. "A place that's ours. And I won't let fear of Harrington dictate our choices." The next morning, with directions from Mrs. Carter, they rode out to investigate a parcel of land 15 miles from Laramie, 200 acres with access to a year-round creek, good grazing land, and a small cabin that needed work but offered immediate shelter. The previous owner, a widower who had decided to return east, was asking a fair price that fell within Flynn's savings. Standing on a rise overlooking the property, Josie could see the potential Flynn described, where the cabin could be expanded, where a garden might thrive, where cattle could graze in the summer months. It wasn't the grandest spread, but it held the promise of everything they'd discussed during their journey. "What do you think?" Flynn asked, his arm around her waist as they surveyed what could be their future home. "Can you see yourself happy here?" Josie leaned against him, drawing strength from his solid presence. "I can," she said truthfully. "It feels right, Flynn, like it's been waiting for us." The decision made, they rode into Laramie to find the land office and make their claim official. By nightfall, they were the owners of 200 acres of Wyoming frontier, and a cabin that leaked when it rained, but was sturdy enough to shelter them while they worked to improve it. Their first weeks on the ranch were a blur of hard work repairing the cabin roof, building basic furniture, acquiring the tools and supplies they'd need for ranch life. Flynn made a trip to the nearest trading post to purchase a milk cow, chickens, and 2 horses to complement Copper, who had earned a well-deserved rest after their arduous journey. Josie found unexpected joy in creating a home from scratch. Each improvement to the cabin, each new addition to their small herd of livestock, represented another step toward the future they were building together. The physical labor was exhausting but satisfying, healing her spirit in ways she hadn't anticipated. As summer faded into autumn, they established a routine of shared work and quiet evenings by the fire. Flynn had begun construction on a proper barn before winter set in, and they'd acquired a small herd of cattle, just 20 head to start, with plans to expand gradually as their resources allowed. One crisp October evening, as they sat on the cabin's newly built porch watching the sunset paint the distant mountains in gold and crimson, Josie finally broached the subject they'd both been avoiding. "I wonder sometimes," she said quietly, "about Timothy. If he knows I escaped Harrington. If he regrets what he did." Flynn's arm tightened around her shoulders. "Do you want to find out? We could send a letter to Denver, make inquiries." Josie considered the question carefully. The pain of her brother's betrayal had faded but not disappeared entirely. "No," she decided finally. "That life is behind us now. Timothy made his choice and I've made mine." She turned to look at her husband, the man who had risked everything to save her. "I chose you. I choose this life we're building." Flynn's kiss was tender, a reaffirmation of the vows they'd exchanged in Laramie. "And I choose you," he murmured against her lips. "Every day for the rest of our lives." As winter descended on their small ranch, bringing snow and bitter winds, Josie found herself grateful for the snug cabin Flynn had worked so hard to prepare for the cold months. With the livestock secured in the new barn and enough provisions stored to last until spring, they settled into the rhythm of frontier winter early mornings tending to animals, days spent on indoor projects and repairs, and long evenings before the fire, planning for the expansion of their herd and improvements to the ranch come spring. On Christmas Eve, with snow falling gently outside and pine boughs decorating their humble home, Josie presented Flynn with news that made his eyes shine with joyful tears. "A baby," he repeated, his voice hushed with wonder as he placed a gentle hand on her still flat stomach. "You're certain?" "As certain as I can be," Josie confirmed, covering his hand with her own. "By summer, we'll be 3 instead of 2. Flynn gathered her into his arms with a tenderness that made her heart swell. "I never thought I could be this happy," he confessed. "Never thought I'd have a home, a wife, a child on the way. You've given me everything, Josie." "We've given each other everything," she corrected, lifting her face for his kiss. "And this is just the beginning." Spring brought new life to the Z-Bar Ranch, as they decided to call their growing operation. Green grass covered the rolling hills, wildflowers dotted the meadows, and the creek ran high with snowmelt from the distant mountains. Flynn added 5 more cattle to their small herd and began breaking ground for the larger house they'd need with a baby on the way. Word of their success had begun to spread in the surrounding area, bringing occasional visitors, neighbors from miles away stopping to introduce themselves. Cowboys looking for work as they expanded their operation. Even Reverend Abernathy making the journey from Laramie to check on the couple he'd married the previous year. Their peaceful existence was interrupted one warm May afternoon by the arrival of an unexpected visitor. Josie, her pregnancy now clearly visible beneath her apron, was hanging laundry to dry when she spotted a rider approaching from the direction of Laramie. Something about the man's posture in the saddle sent a chill of recognition through her before she could even make out his features. "Flynn," she called, one hand moving protectively to her rounded belly. "Someone's coming." Flynn emerged from the barn, wiping his hands on a rag. His eyes narrowed as he spotted the approaching rider, and he moved to stand protectively in front of Josie. "Go inside," he said quietly. "Get my rifle from above the door." "Who is it?" Josie asked, though she already feared she knew the answer. "Brock Harrington," Flynn confirmed, his voice tight with controlled anger. "Looks like he finally tracked us down." Josie hesitated, torn between obeying Flynn's request and standing with her husband. "I won't hide," she decided. "This is our home, our land. I won't cower from him again." Flynn glanced at her, concern and pride warring in his expression. "Stay behind me," he conceded, "and be ready to run if things go badly." Harrington reined in his horse several yards from where they stood. The rancher had aged in the year since Josie had seen him last, his beard now completely gray, new lines etched into his weathered face, but his eyes held the same cold arrogance as he surveyed their modest ranch. "Zachary," he called, dismounting stiffly. "Quite a coincidence finding you here." "Long way from Colorado." "No coincidence," Flynn replied evenly. "You've been looking for us." Harrington shrugged, not bothering to deny it. "You took something that belonged to me, cost me 2 good men in the process." "I took nothing that was yours," Flynn countered. "People aren't property, Harrington, not even in your world." The older man's gaze shifted to Josie, taking in her obviously pregnant form with a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. "I see you wasted no time claiming her for yourself." Flynn's hand moved to the revolver at his hip. "My wife is not a topic for discussion. State your business and be on your way." The emphasis on wife wasn't lost on Harrington, whose mouth twisted in a bitter smile. "My business? I rode 5 days to find you. What do you think my business is?" "If you've come for revenge, you should know we have friends in this territory," Flynn said. "The law respects property rights here. This land is legally ours. Any trouble you start won't end well for you." Harrington laughed, a harsh sound that held no humor. "You think I came to kill you? Boy, if I wanted you dead, you'd never have seen me coming." He shook his head. "No, I came to see for myself what was worth defying me for, worth killing my men for." His eyes moved from Flynn to Josie and back again, assessing. "I've buried 3 wives," he said abruptly. "Outlived them all. No children to show for it. No legacy but land and cattle that strangers will fight over when I'm gone." The unexpected vulnerability in the admission caught both Flynn and Josie by surprise. Harrington seemed suddenly older, diminished somehow. "What do you want from us?" Josie asked, speaking directly to him for the first time. Harrington considered her question, looking around at the modest ranch they'd built. "Nothing," he finally said. "Not anymore. Your brother disappeared from Denver months ago, left owing money to half the town. Whatever I might have wanted died with the men you killed at that cabin." Flynn's posture remained tense, unconvinced. "So you rode all this way to tell us you're letting it go. Forgive me if I find that hard to believe." Harrington's smile was grim. "Believe what you want. I'm an old man, Zachary. Old enough to recognize when I've lost. The woman chose you. You've built something here." He nodded toward Josie's pregnant form. "Created something I never could. That's the real victory, isn't it?" Without waiting for a response, Harrington turned back to his horse. "You won't see me again," he said as he mounted. "Your lives are your own." They watched in stunned silence as he rode away, his figure growing smaller against the vast Wyoming landscape until he disappeared from view entirely. "You believe him?" Josie asked when she could finally find her voice. Flynn put his arm around her, drawing her close against his side. "I'm not sure," he admitted, "but I think he's telling the truth about one thing we've won. We've built something he couldn't destroy." That night, as they lay together in their bed, Flynn's hand resting protectively on Josie's rounded belly where their child grew, they spoke of the future with renewed confidence. Harrington's unexpected appearance and equally unexpected departure had marked the final closing of the door on their past. Whatever his true motives, they chose to believe the threat he represented was truly gone. "I was thinking," Flynn said as Josie nestled against him, "about names for the baby. If it's a boy, maybe Douglas, after Mr. Denton, who gave me my start. And if it's a girl," Josie asked, smiling at his thoughtfulness. Flynn's fingers traced gentle patterns on her stomach. "Elizabeth, after my mother. She would have loved you, Josie. Would have been so proud to know her grandchild was growing on land we owned." "Douglas or Elizabeth," Josie agreed, placing her hand over his. "Perfect names for the next generation of Zacharys." 2 months later, as summer reached its zenith, Elizabeth Margaret Zachary entered the world in the new house Flynn had completed just weeks before her arrival. She had her mother's dark hair and her father's determined chin, a combination that made both parents agree she would be a force to reckon with someday. The years that followed brought growth and prosperity to the Z-Bar Ranch. Flynn's careful management and Josie's tireless work expanded their operation to one of the most respected in the territory. Their small herd grew to over 200 head of cattle, and the original cabin became a bunkhouse for the hands they hired as the ranch flourished. Elizabeth was joined by a brother, Douglas, 2 years later, and eventually by another sister, Charlotte. The Zachary children grew up knowing the value of hard work, the importance of family loyalty, and the story of how their parents had found each other, though the more frightening details were saved until they were old enough to understand. News reached them occasionally from Colorado. Douglas Denton visited once, bringing word that Brock Harrington had indeed honored his promise to leave them in peace. The old rancher had died 3 years after his visit to Wyoming, his vast holdings divided among distant relatives who had no interest in old vendettas. Of Timothy Valenti, they heard nothing for many years, until a letter arrived from Denver informing Josie that her brother had been found dead after a saloon brawl. She mourned not the man he had become, but the brother she had once loved, the family they might have been in another life. On the 10th anniversary of their arrival in Wyoming, Flynn and Josie stood on the rise overlooking their ranch, the sprawling main house, the well-built barn, the bunkhouse, the corrals filled with horses and cattle, the fields where they grew hay for winter feed. Their children played in the yard below, their laughter carrying on the summer breeze. "Did you ever imagine this?" Josie asked, leaning against her husband's solid strength. "When you saw Harrington taking me that day in Denver, did you ever think we'd end up here?" Flynn's arm tightened around her waist, his kiss brushing her temple. "I couldn't have imagined it," he admitted. "But from the moment I decided to go after you, I never doubted we'd find our way somewhere. Together." Josie turned in his embrace, lifting her face to the man who had risked everything to save her, who had built a life and a legacy with her from nothing but courage and determination. "I love you, Flynn Zachary," she said softly, "more with each passing day." His kiss was as tender as their first, filled with the depth of feeling that had grown between them through hardship and joy, through struggle and triumph. "And I love you, Josie Zachary," he murmured against her lips, "now and always." Below them, Elizabeth called for her parents to join the game she had organized with her siblings. Hand in hand, Flynn and Josie walked down the slope toward their children, their home, and the future they continued to build together one day at a time on the land that had become their sanctuary and their legacy. The sun setting behind the distant mountains painted the scene in gold and crimson, a fitting backdrop to the life they had created from the ashes of betrayal and danger. What had begun as a desperate flight toward freedom had become a journey toward love, family, and a happiness neither had dared to imagine in those dark days in Denver. Together, they had transformed a brother's betrayal into the foundation of a life beyond price, a life they had earned with courage, defended with determination, and now cherished with gratitude each day they shared.